Welcome to the podcast. I'm Danielle Goodrick, and joining me today I have David Loseby. David's career background it's over 30 years' experience at senior executive director level, driving value and change through procurement and organisational transformation. David also sits on CIPS Board of Trustees. So, David, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
The procurement and supply chain profession has evolved at an alarming pace, and today's professionals are not seen as buyers, but enablers, business partners, and strategic leaders who understand business needs and are core to the success of their organisation, and who are aligned with their social responsibility, ethics agenda, and most importantly, in the current climate, mitigating risk. The 2020 Salary Guide highlights a growing recognition of the importance of soft skills to today's procurement professionals. And today I'm joined by David, who will be talking to us about the critical soft skills for the modern procurement professional, plus the move towards behavioural procurement. So David, thank you again for your time today. Please, can you share, in your view, the skills shift change for procurement professionals you've seen over the years?
Certainly, I think what we have to perhaps reflect back on, and it's not that far back, when we recognise that procurement people were recognised as the people that actually transacted the purchase orders and were far more operational in their focus, going back probably even only 2 or 3 decades. From there, moving through the usual raft of RFPs and tenders, and then the advent of category management in the 1990s. We can then sort of see the progression then into what was then seen as being new and breaking ground in terms of e-auctions, but now is very common. And then the advancement then into supplier relationship management and effective contract management. More recently, probably in the last decade, a greater focus on ethics and sustainability. But the reality now is that many of those things that we have actually overtaken and become part and parcel of what I call the entry ticket into procurement and taken for granted. And therefore the differentiators start to be more stark and more marked by the advent of activities associated with the soft skills that we need in order to be more effective as procurement professionals within organisations. And therefore, from my point of view, that skills shift change, if we can call it that, is quite tectonic, but that's happened in a very relatively short space of time. From really being very operational to being far more engaged and being part and parcel of the business as a whole and an integrator across all the disciplines and functions that we have in many typical businesses.
Thank you. And as you say, yes, the technical skills and qualifications are the fundamental foundation of procurement professionals and their credibility, but they can be learned. And so, like you say, abilities such as communication, influencing and leadership have become more highly sought after skills in professionals. So in your opinion, which skills will be most important over the next 10 years?
I think for me, and again, recognising that whilst we might see these being the critical skills moving forward, we should also expect that new skills will be demanded of us over the next 10 years. So for me, in the current wave of requirements, what we're starting to see is the need for more pronounced critical thinking skills, and therefore the reflective thinking skills that go with that, soft skills, emotional intelligence, and then looking at sort of some of the things that the World Economic Forum has highlighted, particularly the higher cognitive skills, obviously, but then the ability to effectively make sense and translate many different things that mean different things to different functions across the business, translating them and making sense of them for all parts of the business. Clearly, emotional intelligence and social skills form part of that. And as we've seen in many areas, the advent of technological skills is great and can be seen as great enablers, but the true differential is in the individual itself, in being able to transcend across the social skills and the critical thinking skills and soft skills across the business. And so therefore, this huge shift for me, in a sense, has led to really the understanding around the behavioural procurement piece across a business, because it's simply not enough to have what I call systems and processes the real differentiator comes in the behavioural skills that are then deployed across the business.
Thank you, David. And you talk a lot about the behavioural procurement skills in your book, Soft Skills for Hard Business, in quite a lot of detail. But for people listening today, can you share an overview of these critical skills?
Yes, quite happy to do that. I think, what you'll see is that sort of, as I referenced in some of the earlier chapters, some of the things that may seem quite obvious, such as communication skills, active and effective listening skills, the ability to be able to understand and interpret behavior. The real simple acid test is to sort of say to ourselves, for somebody to behave in a particular way, something has driven them to behave in that way. And our job, in a sense, is to understand what has triggered those behaviours. And so therefore we become far more of a behavioural scientist in understanding what they are. So for me, looking at all those different skills that are being brought to bear, we think about all the things in terms of even decision sciences, social sciences, psychology, particularly the applied cognitive psychology piece, most of which we would not see as being part and parcel of the skill set of a procurement professional. But the reality is we actually need that because it's a critical skill now in order to work across the business.
And a critical skill, like you say, for all the different stakeholders that you're now interacting with as procurement. You talked about automation and the automation of procurement processes and how this will continue to evolve. Automation means that soft skills will become even more critical, and procurement professionals might be freed from repetitive, time-intensive tasks and be able to focus more on business-critical activities and strategic decision-making. So what would your advice be for professionals looking to equip themselves with these soft skills and ensure that they're well placed in their future career?
I think from my perspective, the reality is that in equipping yourself to do this, what we need to recognise is that there are so many facets to this that as I've illustrated in the book, there are many ways to access this. But I think what we need to consider most of all is the fact that there are different approaches that we need to take to different parts and parcel of what we do within our profession, and thinking about the ways in which we can then, engendering trust, as part and parcel of our behavioural set, thinking about how we will then start to collaborate more effectively. All of these things are things that are above and beyond the system and the process things. So therefore, for me, there is actually a very structured approach to the way in which we would engage in active listening skills, for instance. There are particular ways in which we might think about constructing communication. A good example of that would be to think about the way in which we might positively frame a piece of communication as opposed to negatively frame a piece of information. And this is quite critical when we want to bring stakeholders on board with what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve, often because many of the things that we're trying to seek to do is to change the way in which something is currently being done. And often or not, that's where the critical thinking skills come in terms of how we can do things differently, how can we reflect on what is current practice and therefore derive any practice from that. So there are many things, and obviously, when we start to look at these, they start to have quite a different meaning when we look at them in a more profound and in-depth way.
And these critical skills are going to be so important for organisations going forward, but also for procurement to obviously raise their influence internally with stakeholders, like you say, to lead the change and transformation that's needed. So for employers looking to structure their teams and ensure that they have the right skills and people with the right attributes to deliver, what advice would would you give for them to deal with these business opportunities and strategic decision making in the future?
I think what I would say to most people is that you have to ask yourself whether or not you want a career or a job. And for those that want a career, as I describe it, then obviously continuous professional development has to be core and centre to what an individual does, and therefore that is essential in terms of taking control and taking, if you like, in a sense, into your own hands the destiny around how you do the self-directed study, how you differentiate yourself between different candidates, how you think about putting in place even things like decision support systems, how you access some of the ISO standards that have come about and now being used as part and parcel of the behavioural assessments on larger programs and projects, and how that's deployed. I think there are many things, but I think it's up to the individual to recognise that there are parallels in other industries, and certainly in terms of more complex procurement, it is essential that people do acquire these skills to be able to operate in what effectively is tantamount to multicultural environments, and therefore being able to operate in those effectively, you do need to be able to be aware and be adept at being able to work within those different environments.
Thank you, David. That's clear that procurement need to look in terms of wider, in terms of their skill set, and like you say, looking to enhance their abilities in line with other professions as well to deal with the future. So it's been a pleasure to hear from you today and your experience, and gain a deeper understanding of behavioural procurement and how these skills are evolving. Your book, Soft Skills for Hard Business, is referenced, and people will be able to access that book through CIPS Knowledge. Thank you again for listening today. We hope you enjoyed David's podcast, and you can follow the CIPS Knowledge podcast channel to access all the latest content at cips.org/knowledge. Thank you.